Today's daf is Menachos daf Nun, and we will begin 4 lines from the top of daf Nun Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah on daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph is continuing with the theme of Masechtas Menachos for the last several weeks, and that is things that are ma'akiv each other and things that are not ma'akiv each other. And as we saw, the Mishnah is going outside of the box, so to speak. Not all examples were kachim-related examples. We had tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzis, tcheles, etc., etc. Regardless, the Mishnah on the bottom of Mantes and Aleph discuss what's the halacha regarding the carbon tamid, which was brought twice. You had the tamid shel shachar and the tamid shel bein arbayim. Are the two karbonos tamid ma'akiv each other? Or what about the k'tairis? The k'tairis was also brought twice during the day. The k'tairis was brought in the morning, and the k'tairis was brought again bein arbayim. Are the k'tairis ma'akiv zeh? So the Mishnah said on daf mem tes amud aleph, lo yikrivu keves ba'boker yakrivu bein arbayim. That if the tamid shel shachar wasn't brought, it's not ma'akiv the tamid shel bein arbayim. It's still okay to bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. Meaning you could have thought that it's a set, it's a unit. Either you bring both or you bring none. Says the Mishnah, it's not all or nothing. Even though l'katchila you're supposed to bring the tamid shel shachar and the tamid shel bein arbayim, but b'di'eved lo hikrivu keves ba'boker yakrivu bein arbayim. Rav Shimon said it's not so simple. That's only true if they were anusim or shoykigin. If the reason the tamid shel shachar wasn't brought was because of an oinus or a shoykig. But let's say b'mezid the tamid shel shachar wasn't brought, then the halacha is lo yakrivu bein arbayim. Stating that, Rav Shimon said, that's only true for the carbon tamid. As it relates to the k'tairis, lo hiktiru k'tairis ba'boker yaktiru bein arbayim. So according to the chachamim, the tamid shel shachar, the tamid shel bein arbayim, the k'tairis shel shachar, the k'tairis shel bein arbayim are never ma'akiv each other. You could bring the bein arbayim even though the shachar wasn't brought. According to Rab Shimon, there's a distinction between the karbonis tamid and the k'tairis. The carbon tamid, if they were oinus or a shoygig, then you could bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. But if b'mezid the tamid shel shachar wasn't brought, you can't bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. As it relates to the k'tairis, Rab Shimon doesn't make this distinction, and Rab Shimon says lo yiktiru k'tairis ba'boker yaktiru bein arbayim. And then the Mishnah gave a reason for all this, and that is she'ein menchanchen as mizbeach hazav ela b'k'tairis shel bein arbayim v'loy mizbeach ha'oila ela b'tamid shel shachar v'loy yas ha'shulchan ela b'lechem ha'panim b'shabbos v'loy yas ha'menorah ela b'shiva neiroseiro bein arbayim. And Pashat, the Mishnah seems to be giving a reason for everything it just said, and that is because when it comes to inaugurate the Kelim in the Beis HaMikdash, there was an avodah that had to be done. Meaning you couldn't just build a mizbeach and start doing any avodah you wanted to do. The first avodah that was done on any particular Keli of the Beis HaMikdash mattered, and it was very, very precise in terms of how you were mechanech the Kelim, how you inaugurated, how you used them for the first time. Says the Mishnah, the way they were mechanech the mizbeach hazav was with the k'tairis of the bein arbayim, and the way they were mechanech the mizbeach ha'oila was the tamid shel shachar, and that somehow is a reason, it's a tam for the first part of the Mishnah, which discusses what happens if they didn't bring the tamid shel shachar. Is it okay to bring the tamid shel bein arbayim? What happens if they didn't bring the k'tairis shel shachar? Is it okay to bring the k'tairis shel bein arbayim? And the Gemara begins with the obvious question: Chinuch man dechar shmei. Who said anything about chinuch? How is the second part of the Mishnah a reason for the earlier part of the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, the way we read the Mishnayos, it really doesn't make any sense. What we need to do is a little bit of surgery on the Mishnah. We have to edit it, insert words, and then it's all going to come together. The Mishnah begins with a halacha that's actually fakert from what the Mishnah says, and that is, if the tamid shel shachar wasn't brought, you cannot bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. Says the Mishnah, when is that true? That's if you're using the mizbeach for the first time. So if the first time you're going to use the mizbeach, you're going to use it with the tamid shel bein arbayim, that's not okay. The chinuch of the mizbeach has to be with the tamid shel shachar. Let's say the mizbeach was used already, then it's okay. Yakrivu bein arbayim, and it just so happens, punk today on a Tuesday in October, they didn't have the tamid shel shachar. Then it's okay to bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. Rav Shimon argued and said, the only time it's okay to bring the tamid shel bein arbayim if they didn't bring the tamid shel shachar is if they were oinus or a shoygid. If they were amazed, lo yakrivu keves ba'boker lo yakrivu bein arbayim. Yaktiru bein Rabbaim. But the point is, what the Mishnah just did was it added language. It added one line, and that is that although the Tana of the Mishnah holds that it's okay to bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim, despite the fact that Tamid Shel Shachar was not brought, that's only if this Mizbeach was used already. It's a regular day, punct. For whatever reason, it was Batal HaTamid, they didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, it's okay to bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. Rabbi Shimon says, it depends why they didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar. But what would be if this is the first time the Mizbeach is being used? As if to say the Mizbeach became erect 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They never brought the Tamid Shel Shachar because they didn't have the Mizbeach to bring the Tamid Shel Shachar. And now for the first time they want to bring a carbon, the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. That's not okay. That's what the Mishnah is saying. That if the Mizbeach was never used before, thus there was no Tamid Shel Shachar because there physically wasn't a Mizbeach. And now you want to bring a carbon for the first time, that is the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. That's not okay. If the Mizbeach had been used before, then it is okay. The last part of the Mishnah is giving a time for the first halacha. The reason that if the Mizbeach was never used, you can't use it for the first time with the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim is she'ein. That's the last part of the Mishnah. She'ein mechanchen es ha-mizbeach ha'oila ela b'Tamid Shel Shachar. Thus, the first usage has to be with the Tamid Shel Shachar, not the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. Says the Gemara, how do you know this distinction? How do you know that you can't use a Mizbeach for the first time with the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim, but at the same time, it's okay if you miss the Tamid Shel Shachar to bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. The Tana Rabbanan learned from a brayso, "Es hakeves hasheni tasa bein Rabbaim." The pasuk says, "Es hakeves ha'echad tasa ba'boker, ve'es hakeves hasheni tasa bein Rabbaim." We're all familiar with the pasuk, and the Gemara is bothered with the obvious question: why does the Torah have to refer to the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim as the keves hasheni? We know it's the keves hasheni. If the Tamid Shel Shachar is the keves ha'echad, then I could do the back of the envelope arithmetic and figure out that the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim is the keves hasheni. Why does the Torah have to emphasize that it was the keves hasheni? Says the Gemara very geschmack, to teach me that the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim has to be the keves hasheni. It can never be the keves harishon. When is that true? That's if you're using a Mizbeach for the first time. Then, on a brand new Mizbeach, the Keves Hasheni needs to be the Sheni. And it can't be the Rishon. If the Mizbeach, however, was used before, Afilu Rishon, Bein Arbaim, then the Keves Hasheni could be the Keves Harishon, meaning on a regular day, on an old Mizbeach, even if the Tamid Shel Shachar was not brought, it's okay to bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. Reb Shimon made a chiluk. He said, the only time it's true that you bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim, despite the fact that you didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, is if they were an inus or a shaykik. But let's say b'mezid, the Tamid Shel Shachar wasn't brought. Lo yakrivu keves b'boker, lo yakrivu bein Rabbaim. Then you shouldn't bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. Lo yaktiru k'teres b'boker, yaktiru bein Rabbaim. But even Reb Shimon acknowledges that's only true for the two karbanos tamid. It's not true for the k'teres over there. Even if b'mezid the k'teres Shel Shachar wasn't brought, he still brought the k'teres Shel bein Rabbaim. The Gemara asks, "V'chi kohanim chatu mizbeach batal?" And one of the themes that we've seen throughout Kachim is that we look at the Mizbeach as a living organism, kaviyachol. And when we burn, or the Kehanim would burn meat on the Mizbeach, they were feeding the Mizbeach. B'shtei achilas akasim medaber, echad achilas adam, v'echad achilas Mizbeach. Pouring wine on the Mizbeach was a bechina of giving the Mizbeach a glass of wine. This is one of the themes that we've seen. And the Gemara's kasha is that if the Kehanim b'mezid didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, so what's the halacha? You don't bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim, says Reb Shimon. It's mashma that it's not so much mi'ikar adin, because if it was mi'ikar adin, what difference does it matter if it was done by mezid or if it was done by inus or b'shogeg? It must be some sort of knas. But says Reb Shimon, so you want to cancel the Kehanim. You did a very bad thing. You didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar. We're not going to allow you to bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. But this knas is chav la'achrini. It comes at the expense of the Mizbeach. The Mizbeach is losing out. So fragt the Gemara, v'chi kohanim chatu Mizbeach batal? Why should the Mizbeach lose out? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba hachi kamar. Lo yakrivu hein, aval lo cherem yakrivu. Reb Shimon never said that if the Tamid Shel Shachar was not brought b'mezid, do not bring the Tamid Shel bein Rabbaim. Even though it sounds like that's what he said. It's not what he said. He meant those kohanim that were responsible responsible, the ones that won the Gairel, the ones that were responsible to bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, they themselves cannot bring the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim, but others should bring, and as a result, you can accomplish both things. You have the Knas on the one hand, at the same time, the Mizbeach is not going to be batal. Stating that, Reb Shimon only said it with regards to the Karbanos Tamid. As it relates to the K'tairos, Le Yaktiru K'tairos B'Boker, Yaktiru Bein Arbayim. It is okay to bring the K'tairos Shel Bein Arbayim. What's the reason for it? Why did Reb Shimon not make the same knas? You know why? Because this whole situation is anyways lo shchiach, asra, and the Ketairos was a school of Ashiros, as we'll see more about later. The chances of the Ketairos not being brought were very, very slim. We know that a Kayin that did the Ketairos had to earn it. He had to win the Gairo. Not just that, it was Chadashim lebekara. You only were able to bring the Ketairos one time, and the reason is because it was a school of Rashiris, and we wanted to spread the wealth, literally, so that all Kayanim should have an opportunity to get this skula to become Groise Gevirim. So if somebody wins the Gairel, it's his job right now to bring the Ketairos Shel Shachar. You think he's going to sit around and say, you know what, I'm a little lazy, I'm not feeling it, I have other things to do, I'll get to it later. It's not very shchiach that that's going to happen. If you were Zoicha, you won the Gairel, you have the opportunity to get this segula, of course you're going to go ahead and do it. So Rav Shimon says, I don't have to make this knas. I'm worried that somebody will be Paisheya and not bring the Tamid Shel Shachar. It's also Rav Shimon's knas. Rav Shimon says that if you didn't bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, you can't have anything to do with the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim. But as it relates to the Ketairos, Rav Shimon says, for that I'm not worried. This incidentally has ramifications, lahalacha. We'll get to that a little bit later in the daf. So the Gemara, Rav Shimon, the Kula Hisakreva Bein Arbayim, she'ein mechanchen es mizbeach. So the Mishnah said that the way they inaugurated, the way they were mechanech, the Mizbeach HaZahav, that's the Mizbeach that was in the Heichel, was with the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim. The way they were mechanech, the Mizbeach HaOila, that's the Mizbeach that was in the Azara, was with the Tamid Shel Shachar. But the Mizbeach HaOila's chinuch happened al yedei the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim. Freit the Gemara Vatanya, we learned in a Braisa, B'Ketairos HaSamim Shel Shachar, it's a stira. Was it the Ketairos HaSamim Shel Bein Arbayim, or was it the Ketairos HaSamim Shel Shachar? Says the Gemara Tanoi, it's Machlekes Tanam. Amar Abaye said, Mistabrik Mandam Ketairos HaSamim Shel Bein Arbayim. It's mistaber to me that the mandama that says that the way they were mechanech, the Mizbeach HaZahav, was with the Ketairos, not Shel Shachar, but Shel Bein Arbayim. And why is it mistaber the chsiv? Because the pasuk says when it's describing the miluim, and that's when they were mechanech the kelim that were used in the Mishkan, as mentioned in Parshas Tetzav. And the pasuk over there says, Ba'boiker, be'tiva yes haneros yaktirena. And the pasuk seems to begin to describe the chinuch first thing in the morning. The Kohen, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who did it, but the Kohanim should bring the Ketairos at the same time that they were meitiv the neiros. Now, what does meitiv haneros mean? When they clean the neiros. Says the Gemara, had these neiros not been lit the previous night, then there's nothing to clean in the morning. Elamai, they must have lit the neiros the night before. If they lit the neiros the night before, says Rashi, it's Ikr Chasam and Asay from the Gemara, inserts Rashi, that means they probably were maked the Ketairos the night before as well. Because we know that the Zman of the Ketairos, Shel Bein Arbayim, was Toloi in the Zman of the Adlakas HaMenorah. The two are very much related to each other. They both happened at the same exact time. So if we know that there was Hatavas HaNeiros in the morning, how do we know that? Because the pasuk says that. It means there was Hadlakas HaNeiros the night before. If there was Hadlakas HaNeiros the night before, it's Mistabra. Abaye doesn't have a checkmate proof, but Abaye said Mistabra. It's Mistabra, it's reasonable, because we find that the two are very much related to each other. So it's Mistabra that they were mak to the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim as well. Oh, so you see that the first thing was the Ketairos during the Shivas Yemei HaMeluim. Thus, this is a limud, it's a binyanav for all chinuch of the Mizbeach HaZahav, all the Mizbechas that would be in the Heichel, that the way you were mechanech, the first usage would always be with the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim. Says the Gemara, the mandama Ketairos HaSamim Shel Shachar, the mandama that says that they weren't mechanech the Mizbeach HaZahav with the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim, but rather with the Ketairos Shel Shachar. How does he know that? Gomer mi Mizbeach HaOila. He learns it from the Mizbeach HaZahav. Just like the Mizbeach HaOila was with the Tamid Shel Shachar. How do we know that? We learned that already from a pasuk. It's a keves hasheni tasar arbayim. The keves Shel Bein Arbayim has to be the sheni because you were mechanech it with the keves, with the Tamid Shel Shachar. Avkan b'Ketairos HaSamim Shel Shachar. So it's true. There's a stira. Our Mishnah says the way they were mechanech the Mizbeach HaZahav was with the Ketairos Shel Bein Arbayim. There's a brisa that says the way they were mechanech the Mizbeach HaZahav was with the Ketairos Shel Shachar. It's not a hakasha tanoihi. And the Gemara even gave the sources for each one of these respective shitas in the Tanam. By the way, when we talk about being mechanech, the Mizbeach Hazav, the Mizbeach Hayla, it's important to realize that historically speaking, there were many Mizbeachas, unfortunately. Things happen. Sometimes the Mizbeach was Nifkam. You have sugis and Masechtes Vachim that talk about Nifkam HaMizbeach. After the Chanukah story, the Makom HaMikdash was ransacked, and they had to start rehabilitating, literally, the Kelim of the Beis HaMikdash. And there's Mishnayos and the sugis and Shas that talk about if they had to remake certain kelim of the Beis Hamikdash. What if they didn't have gold? The Katchila, the menorah is supposed to be miksha, zahav, tahar. What if they didn't have gold? We had the sugis earlier, Masechtas Menachos. So there's different halachos, but it's all based on, historically speaking, we think of the one menorah and the one mizbeach. There were many mizbeachas, unfortunately, and from time to time, things needed to happen. So if right now you're using a brand new mizbeach, there's a process of how they would unveil this mizbeach. It was an unveiling. They were mechanechet. How were you mechanechet? So the mizbeach Oyla, the one that was in the Azara, that was with the Tamid Shal Shachar. What about the Mizbeach Hazav? That's just Machlekes Tanam right here. The first thing they would do was Keteiris. The question is, was it the Keteiris Shal Shachar or was it the Keteiris Shal Bein Rabbain? Either way, what about the Shulchan? So you have a Shulchan now, a brand new Shulchan. We're going to unveil it. It's going to happen on Shabbos. That's when the ceremony is going to take place. And the first thing they're going to do is they're going to put the lechem aponim on it. That says the Mishnah, V'loyas hashulchan ela b'lechem aponim b'Shabbos. Says the Gemara, it's mashma ela b'choil ichnuchi hu dolei mechanech hakedushim mikdash. The Mishnah emphasizes that they unveiled the shulchan on Shabbos. That was when it was done. As if to say that the first usage of the shulchan had to be on Shabbos. But ordinarily, you can use the shulchan whenever you want. Frek the Gemara, is that true? We know that the shulchan was only used on Shabbos. What was the shulchan used for? The lechem aponim. You had the yid bais chalas. That's what the shulchan was used for. And when did the chalas would remain on the shulchan for a week? And the changing of the guard happened on Shabbos. At the time that the mishmoris in the Beis HaMikdash, the shifts of the kayanim in the Beis HaMikdash would switch, from shift A to shift B, from shift B to shift C, that's when they would take the breads off the shulchan. They would divide it. 6 of the breads would go to the mishmar hayoytze, that's the shift that was leaving, and 6 of it would go to the mishmar hanichnas, that's the shift that was coming. When was the changing of the guard? It was all done on Shabbos. That means the whole avoida of the lechem aponim was done on Shabbos. So the Gemara's catch is that why are we emphasizing that the unveiling of the shulchan, the inauguration, the chinuch of the shulchan happened on Shabbos? It sounds like ela b'choil on a weekday. You just can't be mechanechet. Hakedusha mikdash. Mar says no, it's not a diak. The chinuch v'kiddush shulchan Shabbos. No, don't make the diak. Of course, the shulchan was only used on Shabbos. There would have been a havamid, and then maybe the chinuch could have been done during the week. Says the Mishnah, the chinuch of the shulchan and the kiddush of the shulchan, all usage of the shulchan was always done on Shabbos. And by the way, says the Gemara, Kedektani Seifa. The Seifa for sure means that. Because what did the Seifa say? How are they mechanech the menorah? You have a brand new menorah. What do? You light the 7 neiros, Bein Arbayim. Obviously, that's what you always did with the menorah. What, on a regular day you're going to make the diak, you only lit 6 neiros? Or 5 neiros? Or you didn't do it Bein Arbayim? This is not up for debate. These are psukim in the Torah. We know how you lit the menorah every day. Elamai, the Mishnah is just saying, that's also the way you were mechanech. So as it relates to the shulchan, it's the same thing. Either way, we're talking about the Keteiros. So the Gemara digresses for a moment with an interesting brisa. Tanu Rabbanan, a brisa. Zehu Keteiros she'osel yachid al mizbeach achitzayin v'hiraz sha haisa. So the brisa is describing a Keteiros that was brought by a yachid, and the brisa says this is the only time that a yachid brought Keteiros on the mizbeach achitzayin. Don't learn anything from there. The reason you can't learn anything from there is because this was a hirasha. It says in Marhecha. What is it referring to? It's a very cryptic brisa. There was this hirasha, this one-time event where there was a keteiros that was brought by a yachid on the mizbeach hachitzai. What's it referring to? Says the Gemara. What it's referring to is the Nesiim. The Nesiim, amongst the karbanos that they brought, biyoyim hakamas hamishkan, the first day of Nisan, the second day Nisan, the third day Nisan, they brought Ketairis, just to read a pasuk in the Torah that we're all familiar with. Right, the parsha in the scene repeats itself 12 times. That's why Parshas Nasa is the longest parsha in the Torah, and that's why we're so familiar with the Kriya, because you hear it again and again and again. So here, Makriv B'Yom Rishon, it's Karbanai, Nachshav and Aminadav L'matu, V'Karbanai. Right, Karas Kesef Achas, we all know this. Kaf Achas Asara Zahav Malaya Ketairis. One of the things that the Torah says is that he brought Ketairis. Says the Gemara, that Ketairis that was brought by a Yachid, it was the Nasi's carbon. Right, it's the Chattas is always referred to as Chattas Nachshan, the Seir of Nachshan. So it was Nachshan, it was the Yachid's carbon. Kaf Achas Asara Zahav Malaya Ketairis was something that was brought one time, and it's the only time that a Yachid brought Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And the Gemara makes Siddiq. It sounds like Ela Yachid on Mizbeach HaChitzon Hu Delay. It sounds like a Yachid only that time was able to bring Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Oh, Mizbeach Pnimi Makrib. It sounds like if a Yachid wanted to bring Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, no worries. Another diak. Vesu, on Mizbeach HaChitzon Yachid Hu Delay. It sounds like only a Yachid can't bring Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Hatzibah Makrib. But let's say the Tzibur decides that they want to bring a Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, it's okay. Now, the Ketairis was brought on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. It wasn't brought on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. One of the names of the Mizbeach HaPnimi was the Mizbeach HaKetairis. It was called the Mizbeach HaKetairis because that's where the Ketairis was brought. It was called the Mizbeach HaPnimi simply because it was inside. It wasn't outside in the courtyard. It was in the Heichal. It was also called the Mizbeach HaZav because it was made out of gold. In contrast to the Mizbeach that was in the Azar, that was called the Mizbeach HaNechoshes because it was made out of copper. It was called the Mizbeach HaChitzon because it was outside, and it was also called the Mizbeach HaOila because that's where the Karban Oila and really almost all Karbanas were brought. But regardless, so the Gemara says it sounds like a Yachid can't bring a Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. I didn't see him. That's a Rasha. To the Yukim. It sounds like a Tzibur could bring on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and it sounds like maybe a Yachid could bring the Mizbeach HaPnimi. But the Gemara says it can't be. But Tanya will into the Brayso. Yachid, maybe I would think that if a Yachid wants to bring Ketairis, he could bring. So a Yachid could bring an Oila, he could bring a Shlamim, a Taita. What if a Yachid decides one day, I want to bring Ketairis? Maybe you could do it. And the whole parsha of Nidarim and Nidavos, as they relate to Karbanis, maybe should apply Talmud. You can't bring a Ketairis Zara, a friend. The Ketairis that the Torah prescribes, that's the only Ketairis that's allowed to be brought. Yachid maybe I would think maybe only Yachid can. But maybe the Tzibur that had the Ketairis brought on its behalf every single day, maybe the Tzibur could bring it as an Adava as well. Talmud Loima Leisalu is a Lashon Rabbin. Even the Tzibur is not allowed to. I would think maybe on the Mizbeach Pnimi it's not okay, but maybe the Mizbeach Chitzon is okay. Talmud Loima Hashem and Amishcha Ves Ketairis Asamim L'Koy. You can only bring the Ketairis that the Torah lays out. Any other Ketairis is not okay. So it's a stira. From the Brayso, it's mashma. A Yachid can't bring a Ketairis Nedava on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. To the Yukim. A Yachid could bring on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, and a Rabbim, a Tzibur could bring on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. Here it's mashma. Every Ketairis that you're not allowed to bring is a Ketairis Zar. Amar Apapa, let me buy your kamar. Now, the way you read the Brayso is let me buy a Tzibur on the Mizbeach HaChitzon L'Yashkechon. That's Pasha that the Tzibur can't bring Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon because there's no precedence for that. You don't find anywhere that the Tzibur brought Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. But let me buy a Yachid on the Mizbeach HaPnimi L'Yashkechon. And that's Pasha that a Yachid can't bring Ketairis on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. Again, there's no precedence for that. But I would have thought that maybe a Yachid could bring a Ketairis Nadav on the Mizbeach HaChitzon because there is precedence for that. The Ashkechon, where did you find that? B'Nesiyim, that's the Brayso Rasha, let's say Rasha, and that is not going to be okay. And by the way, we're not going to speak about this morning, but the whole idea of a Ketairis Zara is a very big deal. Nadav and Avihu. What caused them to die? So even though there's so many pshatim in Chazal, the Gemara Eruvin, and so many different midrashim, countless pshatim, but at the end of the day, the Torah says that they brought a Ketairis, actually Tziva, they brought Ketairis that they weren't supposed to bring, and the Ketairis Zara was ultimately their downfall. Kairach va'adasai. How was it decided who was telling the truth? Was it Moshe and Aharon or was it Kairach v'adasai? It was by a Ketairis. Everybody bring a Ketairis. Whoever Ketairis is the real Ketairis will be chosen. And Kairach v'adasai, their Ketairis was the Ketairis Zara, and as a result, the Ketairis Zara consumed them. Even if you bring the Ketairis that you're supposed to bring, if you're missing one of the Samamonim, it's already a Ketairis Zara, so to speak, and you're already going to be Chayim Misa. So there's a lot related to Ketairis. We're going to learn sugis of Ketairis later in Masechtas Menachos, but for now, before we go weiter, just one aura. So the Gemara mentioned the idea that the Ketores was a school of Ashiras. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said there's a nafkamina la'alacha. Nafkamina is that I believe that if the Talmud Shel Shachar was not brought b'mezid, then the Kohanim that were responsible to bring the Talmud Shel Shachar were not allowed to be involved in the Talmud Shel Bein Arbaim. It's a knas, so to speak. But if the Ketores Shel Shachar was not brought b'mezid, I'm not worried about that. Why don't you make the same knas? Says Reb Shimon, because it's loy shchicha. And the reason it's loy shchicha is because it's ma'asra, because it was ma'asher, and as a result, it's chavivale, and it's just not likely it's going to happen. In the event it happens, it happened. But I'm not going to impose a knas and a takana over something that I believe is very, very loy shchiach, that it should actually take place. So where's this idea that this Ketores is a school of Ashiras, a nafkamina lahalachos? It's halacha that everybody's familiar with. The Ramah in Hilchas Mila in Yeridea Simin Reish Samachay talks about the chashivas of the sandik. Says the Ramah v'noyagim lahader achar mitzvazu liyos sandik litvois hatinoik l'moyaloi. That there's an inyan to be mahader, to want to be the sandik, to hold the baby at the time of the bris milah. It says the Ramah, "V'yafa koyach hasandik mikoyach hamoyel la'akdima l'kriyas haTorah." The sandik is more chashav in the picture, right? If you take a snapshot of a bris milah and you want to know who's the most chashav person in the room after the child, who's the most chashav person in the room? You think maybe the moil? That's not the moil. Says the Ramah, it's the sandik. V'yafa koyach hasandik mikoyach hamoyel. And by the way, says the Ramah, a nafkamina la'alacha. If there's kriyas haTorah, you should give the aliyah to the sandik, because for that moment, for that morning, he's the most chashuv person. As a result, he gets the aliyah. The whole sandik, says Rama, what's the reason for it? It's because a sandik is kimaktik Ketores. And being that it's as if he's bringing, imagine there was a yid in your bes medrash who that day brought the Ketores. I think you'd give him shlishi or shishi, right? You give him the aliyah. So the sandik is the maktik Ketores. If he's the maktik Ketores, he's chashuv, and as a result, there's an Indian lahakdimai l'kriyas haTorah. Says Rama, how do I know that? In parentheses, it's a maril who quotes a Rabbeinu Peretz. So this comes from Rishonim, but the bottom line is, says the Ramah, that the sandik is very, very chashuv. Thus, v'noyagim lahader achar mitzvazu, people travel to be sandik. It's a very, very big deal, and the reason is because when you're sandik, it's as if you brought the Ketores, and as a result, says the Ramah, is more chashuv than the moil, you should give him the aliyah. The Ramah continues, and it says, it's for that reason, there's a noyag in the minhag that if one person has many boys, he shouldn't repeat sandikos. So he shouldn't give sandik to the same person for two of his sons. Why? Because being that the sandik is kamak the Ketores, and we know the Gemara says in Masechtas Yuma that one kohen never did the Ketores twice. The reason is because it was a school of Ashiras. We wanted to spread the wealth. We wanted other people to have an opportunity to be able to have the school. So says the Ramah, again, quoting the Maril, quoting Rabbeinu Peretz, that the same thing is going to be true when it comes to Sandakais. And therefore, says the Ramah, the minhag is shleilitein shnei yeladim lebal bris echad kid amrin gabi Ketores chadashim leketarim. Says the Vilna Gaon, dvarav ein lahem shachar. This that the Ramah said, that the minhag is not to give the same sandikois twice for two of your boys, ein lahem shachar. Absolutely not. No shaychus. The im came because if the Ramah, b'shem the Maril, b'shem Rabbeinu Peretz, is oisgehalten, then my time in meyadam echadafka. Then why is it only I can't be sandik for one person's two sons? The echad lo yaseh beis pamim sandik lo'olam. I mean, if the Makar is the Ketores, a kohen was never able to do the Ketores twice, period. That's the way it was. It wasn't me Adam Echad. He was never able to do Ketores twice. So if there's an idea that the sandik is to make the Ketores, so why is it that one person gets on the Ketores 100 times? It just has to be from 100 different fathers. L'chayra, the halacha should be that you can never be sandik twice. Says the Vilna Gaon, and here's the punchline, Ula oilam, and by the way, I never saw a sandik become a gver. And as a result, to me, this whole idea that the sandik is kemakta Ketores ela haminik al pitzavos Rabbi Chasid, it's true there's a minig, the Ramah quoted the minig, but it has nothing to do with this Maril b'shem Rabbeinu Peretz relating sandikoi somehow to makta Ketores. It's based on a tzava from Yehuda Chasid, and it falls into that. That's a whole different conversation. But the bottom line is, says the guy very, very sharp. Dvar of ein lahem shachar. And then the Vilna Gaon says, so we've been speaking about some sharfa Gaon. This is Shalai Kedarka. The Vilna Gaon about Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin a Cholamayda. Here's a very sharfa Vilna Goyen, where the Goyen says, Tvarav Eilam Shachar, Ula Eilam Loira Inu Sandik Semesasha. Stating that the Gedolei HaPoskim wrote Shuvas about this Ramah. So again, the Ramah says that there's an Indian not to give a Sandik twice, meaning for two of your boys, and it's based seemingly on this Maril, B'Shem Rabbeinu Peretz, and the Vilna Goyen came out very, very sharp. The Noid to be Yehuda in a Tshuva, it's in Yeridea Madura Kama Simin Pevav, was asked the kasha about someone that had a lot of boys, Kanai Nahar, and he wanted to repeat Sandik, because he was looking for a Chashav Sandik, and he wanted to repeat Sandik, and he sent a letter to the Noid to be Yehuda, is it okay? So unfortunately, Yehuda responded to this Tshuva a lot, very much after the fact. It's actually interesting. This is how he begins the tshuva. Divrei igartoi. I mean, this was a shtickle zman garama, right? Time is of the essence. But either way, divrei igartoi min tishrei ha'avar. He got the tshuva last tishrei. Higiyani b'cholamoid sukkos. He said he got the tshuva on cholamoid sukkos. You see that? Va'oz ein halavler yoytze b'kol masay. It's pens down on cholamoid. So he said, when I got the tshuva, I couldn't respond because you can't write on cholamoid. The achaz man higiyas man asifas. Then the Nuzman started, etc. He says, and then I got busy again. Bottom line is that Yehuda sits down now to write a tshuva. And this is the gist of his tshuva. He says as follows. He says, I don't like responding to shaylas that have no shayrish and shas. V'divrei Rabbeinu Peretz shehevi maril b'reishel chesmila hu rak ke'en asmachta. It's like an asmachta. Los his tam al mashe nimne melechabi le'echa b'shnei bonim. Ubeguf ha'davar shedima maril mitzvah zula machtik teres ani tameya. The bottom line is, the Yehuda told the shayl that this whole thing is a minig, and it's not rooted in shas. And being that it's not rooted in shas, says the Yehuda, if you're familiar with my tshuvas, you know, ein daiti noicha lahashiv bedavar she'ein loy shayrish min hashas. Stating that, the Yehuda wrote a tshuva. He has a little bit of an arichos, and at the end, the Yehuda writes, v'hakol rak derech drush v'remes. But everything I'm telling you, everything is ein lam shayrish v'ikah b'gemara v'loy le'ikah v'loy le'minik kavua u'b'chom medinas poilim ein medaktikim v'zeh. He says, to me, in Poland, people are medaktik. U'baharmi mekoymos, he says, in many places, harav, hakavua, hu chiyav l'sandik talmid. The Rav HaKavua always gets sandik. It's like a standing, the Rav gets shlishi, the Rav gets sandik. V'gam poim kilasenu, ein hakpakam lakbidim zeh. And then again, finally, at the very end, he says the same exact thing. V'yoysim is ein laharich b'davar shekol ha'shayrish eino min ha'talmid v'dai ke'es b'zeh. So this is the Noid Yehuda l'shitasa. I mean, Baruch Hashem, we've had the opportunity to go through a lot of these tshuvas together in the daf, where the Noid Yehuda didn't write tshuvas based on divrei agada. So whether it's Agadata, whether it's Kabbalah, whether it's Zayar, the Noid Yehuda drew a line. There was a very great distinction between Gemaras and everything else. And again, Noid Yehuda once even was forced to write a tshuva to explain his position, because the Shayla was very bothered. Told the Noid Yehuda, well, you're not Machshav Agadata and Midrashim, and he told the Rashba wrote a whole sefer on Agadata. And he wrote back, he says, and the same Rashba that wrote a sefer on Agadata writes somewhere that you don't bring any rayas from Agadata. So the bottom line is, Vadvarim Matikim, we have read bites on this, but the bottom line is this is the Noid Yehuda, this was his take. He said, I hear, it's a minig, and the Ramah quotes a Maril, who quotes Rabbeinu Peretz, but at the end of the day, perspective. The perspective is, it's not rooted in Gemara. And if it's not rooted in Talmud Bavli, all it is a minig ba'alma. He says, even though there's midrashim, it's a smachta ba'alma, he calls it. And he says, as a result, the minig I've seen otherwise, they give it to the Rav, it's really not such a big deal. The Chassam Sofer also wrote a tshuva on this topic, and it's in Shailos, the tshuva Chassam Sofer Rechaim, Shuva Kuf Nun Ches, and he begins as follows. He says, "V'nirali sheyesh lazeh shayrish v'yisoid alpi machakos maril reishel chesmila b'shem Rabbeinu Peretz," and he brings this minig. Says the Chassam Sofer, "Hini Risa b'Noid Yehuda Simen Peivav doichet divrei Rabbeinu Peretz k'la'achayad." He says the Noid Yehuda was doichet k'la'achayad umachalei amoiche. Lochein, says the Chassam Sofer, I feel an obligation lahashiv al kol divrei agoyin zal b'mechilas kvoidoi ki torehi. he says, "But Mechilas Kvoida, I have to go." And no, I disagree with the Noda Yehuda's approach of just being mevatel this whole minute kalach hayad ubeshagam ki yotzasi lahatzdik hatzadik to meikar. He's coming to be matzdik to maril b'shem Rabbeinu Peretz. Incidentally, Rabbeinu Peretz Kiyodua wasn't only a Talmudist; he was also a Kabbalist. Rabbeinu Peretz was one of the Rishonim who was Kiyodua, a tremendous makubal as well. So there's probably some Kabbalah in this. But the bottom line is the Chassam Sofer goes and responds to everything that the Noda Yehuda says. Again, it's beyond the scope of what we do now. But Ayin Sham, the Noda Yehuda's tshuva, which is in Yeridea, Madura Kama Simin Pevav, and the Chassam Sofer's tshuva, which is in Erechaim Simin Kuf Nun Ches. But one interesting thing that has a Kachim theme, and that is that the Noda Yehuda Tainid, he says, I've seen the Rabbanim in cities, they always take sandik. It's a standing thing. They always get sandik. So if they always get sandik, you see it's not like the Ramah. So where's this Messiah from? Says the Chassam Sofer, as it relates to that ha'ara from the Noda Yehuda, it's very pasha. He said, because what's the makar that you shouldn't have sandik twice? It's based on the Ketores. Because no Kohen was able to have Ketores twice. But is that true, says the Chassam Sofer? It's not. Because we know the Kohen Gadol was makriv chelik b'rosh. The Kohen Gadol was allowed to do whatever he wanted. That means there was a carve out in this halacha, and that was the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol was always allowed to do what he wanted. Says the Chassam Sofer, the Rav of the city is the Kohen Gadol. The Rebbe is the Kohen Gadol. He could do it. Don't bring me rayas from the Rabbanim. The Rabbanim, zilbas time, but the whole time is based on this kachim thing. And being that you find that the Kohen Gadol was makriv chelik b'rosh, so it makes sense that he would be able to be makriv chelik b'rosh as well. It's interesting. The Chassam Sofer says that the Vilna Goyen Tainas that me'olam le'ra'inu sandik shemes asher, and he says it's not true. He believes it's a tremendous school of Hashiras, and he says that even though the Gemara says Banei chayu mezoynei lav b'schusa talyum milsa ela b'mazla talyum milsa, but Tosfos Kiyodua says ein mazal Yisrael, which means that b'schus gadol Tosfos in the end of Masechta Shabbos a person could change his mazal, and he says that he thinks sandikoyis is begeder schus gadol. Fascinating. It's begeder schus gadol. So whereas the Noda Yehuda, like the Chassam Sofer says, was doicha, this minhag k'la'achar yad, because it's not rooted in Shas Poskim, and as a result, the Noda Yehuda wasn't very concerned with this minhag, and he said that the minhag poem was not that way. The Chassam Sofer had a very different take. The Chassam Sofer, and again, I think this is the Chassam Sofer Kedarkoi, who very much accepted this mahalach. But the bottom line is, it's fascinating, the Noda Yehuda's approach, the Chassam Sofer's approach, both gedoyle aposkim, but very, very different approach when it came to this. It's actually interesting that one of the makaris that the Chassam Sofer says is that we're going to read in Parshas V'zayis HaBracha, Simchas Torah's Kriya. So the pasuk says, "Ulelevi yamar tu mechav urechel ish chasidecha." So omer la'av v'im la'yis v'esachav la'yekrev v'esbanav la'yada ki shamru imrasecha ubrischa yintzayro. And then the pasuk says, "Yoru mishpatecha liyakov v'sayrascha liyisrael yasimu k'torah ba'apecha v'chalul ha'mizbechecha." So it says the Chassam Sofer, what does brischa yintzayro mean? It says Rashi, bris milah. Because even though the Yidden didn't do bris milah the 40 years they were in the midbar, but Shevet Levi did the bris milah. So Shevet Levi was ubrischa yintzayro. The very next pasuk is Yasimu k'torah yoru mishpatecha liyakov v'sayrascha liyisrael yasimu k'torah ba'apecha. Zok te'el Rashi ru'uyen elu lekach. Says the Chassam Sofer, how do you read these two Rashis? It's very simple. The way Rashi is explaining is, you want to know why Shevet Levi was Zoicha to Yoru Mishpatecha LeYaakov V'Seirascha LeYisrael and to Yasimu K'Torah Ba'Pecha V'Chalul HaMizbechecha. It's because of Brischa Yinsayru. Because Shevet Levi kept Bris Milah, that's why they were Zoicha to Yoru Mishpatecha LeYaakov V'Seirascha LeYisrael and to Yasimu K'Torah Ba'Pecha. So it says the Chassam Sofer, it's mamish, it's a mikromola. You see, there's a connection. There's some kesher between Bris Milah and the Ketores. Ubrischa Yinsayru, what's the hemshech? Yasimu K'Torah Ba'Pecha. What's the hemshech? It's this Ramah, B'Shem de Maril, B'Shem Rabbeinu Peretz, that the sandik is kemak the Ketores. Thus, because Shevet Levi was ubrischa Yinsayru, it's their ru'uyen lekach. That's where they were zeicha to Yasimu K'Torah Ba'Pecha. Sagt die Mishnah weiter. Chavitei Kohen Gadol. Loi hayu ban chatzayin ela mevi isarin shalom v'chaytzeyo. So a little bit of background. There were karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash that were brought twice a day. You had the carbon tamid, as the kevesa echad tasa b'boker, as the kevesa sheni tasa ben rabbayim. You had the ketores. You had the ketores that was brought in the morning, and you had the ketores that was brought in ben rabbayim. Another carbon that was brought every single day in the Beis Hamikdash, not once but twice, was the Minchas Chavitan. The Minchas Chavitan was brought by the Kohen Gadol, and he would bring it ba'boker and ba'erev. It's a pasuk in the Torah. It's right in the beginning of Parashat Saf. Vayidar b'Hashem al Moshe Leimor. Zeh korban aharon uvanav asher yakrivu l'Hashem b'yom himashach oisai. Asira sa'efa was a mincha. Soiles mincha tamid. Machtzisa ba'boker u'machatzisa ba'erev. Half of it was born in the morning, and half of it was born in the evening. So this korban mincha, which was made up of an asira sa'efa, was divided into two. Half ba'boker, half ba'erev. Bottom line is another hakrava that was done every single day in the Beis Hamikdash. It was brought by the Kohen Gadol. It was considered a personal korban of the Kohen Gadol. But the bottom line is it was brought twice a day. So the Mishnah, this minchas chavitin that the Kohen Gadol brought twice a day. How was it brought? Chavitin Kohen Gadol lehayu ban chatzayim. It was not brought where the Kohen Gadol would bring half in the morning, be mekadesh this half of the yisarin, be makravit, go home for lunch, come back with another half, be makdish that, and bring the second half. That was not okay. Ella, the way it had to be done was maybe yisarin shalom. He would have to bring the entire share, be mekadesh it, then v'choitzeyu divided into two, makriv mechza ba'boker, be makriv half of it in the morning, and mechza bein rabbayim, and the other half of it bein rabbayim. Kohen shehevi mechza shachar. So what happens if the kohen brought half in the morning and then he died? Uminu kohen achar, and now they were mamana, the skan kohen gadol, he steps into the kohen gadol shoes. Now they were mamana a new kohen gadol. Lo yavi chatzi yisar mi beisai. He now has to bring the minchas chavitin in the afternoon. Now he can't just bring a half of yisarin for the half of Yisrael that he needs to bring in the afternoon. Additionally, he can't bring the Chatzi Yisrael Shal Rishon. He can't bring the other half of the Minchas Chavitin that the first Kohen Gadol was already mafresh. Ella, he has to do the same thing. Maybe Yisrael and Shalim. He has to bring a complete Yisrael. V'chaitzeo and divide it into half. Makriv Mechza, he brings half of it. Umechza of it, the other half gets lost. Nimsu, in this case, Shnei Chatzam Karev. Shnei Chatzam Karev is going to come out that two halves are going to be Karev and two halves are going to be lost. Right? What happened? The Kohen Gadol in the morning was makdish an entire Yisarei. He was makriv half, and then he died. The other half can't be brought by the second Kohen Gadol, thus it's going to go to waste. The second Kohen Gadol again has to bring an entire Yisarei. He's going to be makriv half. That's the second part of the Minchas Chavitin that's going to be brought that day. But the other half can't be brought the next day, thus it's going to be lost as well. So you're going to end up being makriv two halves, and you're going to end up losing two halves. Tanu Rabban on Ilun mincha machzis. Had the Torah said that you should bring a mincha machzis, I would have thought maybe chatzi yisar mi beis shachris or makriv, chatzi yisar mi beis yarvis or makriv. Then the Kohen Gadol could bring half in the morning and bring another half in the afternoon. Talmud, it's not what the Torah says. What the Torah says is machatzisa ba'boker u'machatzisa ba'erev. What does machatzisa mean? Half of it, as if you're starting off with a davar shalem and you're bringing half of it. Mechzim yishalim u'mak. Okay, it's that maybe yisar and shalem you bring it a complete yisar. V'chaytzeru you divide it into two. U'makriv mechza ba'boker mechza bein rabbayim. Nitma mechza b'shvein rabbayim. What happens if the mechza b'shvein rabbayim became tamei? Oisha avad or it got lost. Yochel yavi chatzi yisar mi beis yarvis v'yakriv. I would have thought you should bring another half of yisarin. I mean makriv v'talmud loimer machtzisa ba'boker. Umachtzisa ba erev mechza mishalim hu mevi. Okay, it's that mevi. Sorry, shalom. Basically, you have to bring a complete sorry. The chaytzeyu umakriv mechza umechza avad nimtzu. What's going to come out is shnei chatzam kreiv shnei chatzam oivdim. So the Braisa's first case was literally the Mishnah, just a slightly different scenario. In the Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol brought half and then he died. So the new Kohen Gadol came. He had to bring a whole. There's two halves that are going to be brought and two halves that are going to be lost. In the first case of the Brisa, the Kohen Gadol brought half, and then the other half became Tameh. So he has to be mashlim now, the second half. But you can't just bring a half. So again, you have to bring a whole. So it's the same thing. Two halves are going to be karev and two halves are going to be lost. What happens if the Kohen Gadol was makriv mechza shachar u'meis and then he died? So this is the second part of the Brisa, which is literally our Mishnah. Uminu achar tachtev, they appointed another Kohen Gadol. Yochel yavi chatzi yisar mi beis chatzi yisar shal rishon. I would think that the second Kohen Gadol should just bring a chatzi, so he could bring the minchas chavitin of bein arbayim, or he should bring the second half of the first Kohen Gadol's Talmud Loimer umachatzi so be'erev mechza mishalim umevi. It always has to be half of a whole. Ha ketzad maybe yisar and shalom v'chaytzeu umakriv mechza umechza avad nimtzu again shnei chatzam oivdim v'shnei chatzaim karev. Very very simple. So what's the theme of the Mishnah and this Brisa that the Gemara brought? That there was a minchas chavitin that was brought twice a day, but the way it worked was it wasn't two independent menachos. It was one mincha, and you took the entire share, you were makdish it, and half of it was born in the morning, half of it was born in the afternoon. What happens if something happened to the second half? Then you would have to bring again another whole, be makriv half of it, and the other half would get lost. And the Gemara gave two scenarios where you're being makriv two halves and you're losing another two halves. That before you go ahead and you lose, quote unquote, that was the Lashon HaMishnah, Lashon HaGemara. Before you lose the other half, you have to make sure it goes bad first, or it becomes possibilina. You would wait overnight, wait till it became bad, this bread, it became a little stale, and then afterwards they would burn it. And the idea is you don't want to burn kachim that's in a pristine state. So you wait for it to go bad, for it to become possible, and afterwards you burn it. Rav Nachman told the Tana Bishlam, I understand the first half. So let's talk about the case of the Mishnah, which is the second case of the Brisa. A Kohen Gadol, he brought the Minchas Chavitin, half of it, and then he died. So what's happening now with the second half of what he brought? You have to burn it. So that second half was once Chazi Lakrava. Why? Because when he was mafresh it, he was destined to bring both halves. It just so happens he died. But being that it was Chazi Lakrava, so there's a sensitivity to it, thus you don't want to burn it without Ibur Tzura, without it first spoiling, becoming possibilina, only after you want to burn it. Elo Sheni. But when the second Kohen Gadol now came, and he too was mafresh, entire Yisaren, and he was only makriv half. The second half, the one that he's not being makriv, the half that's going to be lost, that was destined me'ikara to be lost. Sheni is why didn't Ibertzura? Me'ikara le'ibur in Lechatchila, it was already destined to be lost. So based on that, we shouldn't have to be as sensitive. Something that's me'ikara le'ibur kasi, something that was dead on arrival. It was pasid me'ikara l'chayra. You shouldn't have this halacha of ibur. Tzura says the Gemara Damalachmani Tana Devei Rabba Baravuahu. This Tana who said that both halves that are getting lost need ibur tzura holds like Rabba Baravuah. The Amra Filu Pigul Ibur Tzura, that even pigul before you burn it needs Ibur Tzura, even though pigul was a problem kara, never had kosher avodas, still you need Ibur Tzura. You see, you always need Ibur Tzura. Every time you're going to burn kosher, you need Ibur Tzura. It doesn't matter if it was chazi lakrava meikara or if it wasn't chazi lakrava meikara. If Hashem is a full time rabbanon, maybe it's going according to rabbanon that holds that pigul doesn't need Ibur Tzura. Why would the second half need Ibur Tzura? Given the pal gibu ibai high makriv mechsa chazi, because it's true the other half of the second Kohen Gadol's Minchas Chavitin was never destined to be Karen. Because we knew L'Katchila he was only going to bring a half. Because he became Kohen Gadol in the afternoon. And he was only being mashlim the second half of what the first Kohen Gadol already did. But you didn't know which half he was going to be makriv. Thus, each half was Chazi Lakrava. Being that each half was Chazi Lakrava, we look at it as if it's Chazi Lakrava, it needs Ibur Tzura. Even according to Manaba that holds that it has to be Chazi Me'ikara in order to need Ibur Tzura, we look at each half as being Chazi Me'ikara, thus each half would need Ibur Tzura. Exhale. So just to conclude, with one final ara. So the topic of the second half of today's daf and the daf nun aleph is going to be the Minchas Chavitin. And as mentioned, the Minchas Chavitin was brought every single day by the Kohen Gadol. So every day the Kohen Gadol would bring the Minchas Chavitin. The truth is, there was another time that the Minchas Chavitin was brought. And that is every single Kohen, the first day that he did the Avodah, a Kohen Hedyot, not the Kohen Gadol, would have to bring a Mincha. So we talked about how they were mechanech the Mishnah, the Mizbeach Hazav, and the Mizbeach HaNechoshes, and the Shulchan, and the Menorah. The Kohanim needed a chinuch as well. So the first day that a Kohen did the Avodah, he had to start off by bringing a carbon. Which carbon did he bring? A carbon mincha, specifically the Minchas Chavitin. By the way, it's also known as the Minchas Chinuch. Minchas Chinuch. That was the mincha that was brought to be mechanech the Kohen Hedyot. So the Kohen Gadol would bring the Minchas Chavitin every single day, twice. The Kohen Hedyot would bring it once in his life. He would bring it the first day that he did the Avodah. Now there are shinuyim. It's more related to Daf nun aleph between the Minchas Chinuch and the Minchas Chavitin, but the point is the Torah really says. The Torah says, Zeh carbon Aharon Uvanov. So you see Aharon, who's the Kohen Gadol, brought the Minchas Chavitin, and it was also the carbon that Banov used to bring. Every single Kohen Hedyot, you brought it one time. The first day that he did the Avodah. So it's interesting that the first day that a Kohen did the Avodah, he would bring a carbon. Which carbon? The Minchas Chavitin, a carbon mincha. So I was thinking that maybe the beer hadvarim, why a carbon mincha is a shliach tzibur when he gets up to daven for the Yom Eiran, Musaf, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, he starts off with the tefillah Hineni, and he begins with Hineni ha'ani mimas, and the shliach tzibur acknowledges that I was just given this responsibility to be the shliach tzibur to represent this chashav kehila, and I'm an ani, ich bin an araman. What does it mean he's an Araman? He's an Ani Mimas from Meissen. V'afal Pisha Eni Kedai V'Hogin Lokach, right? That's what the Shlich Tzibur acknowledges. He realizes that he's an Ani Mimas. So I was thinking that maybe this carbon mincha that the Kohen Hedyot brought on the first day that he was going to do the Avodah was his Hineni. He was an Ani Mimas, and he brought the carbon mincha, which was the minchas Ani. It was the carbon that wasn't just brought by the Ani, but it was brought by the person that couldn't even afford. It was the carbon that was brought pedali dalas. What's the symbolism? This is his Hineni. Hineni ha'ani mimas, niras v'nifchad. He's coming in now to do the Avodah for the first time in the Beis HaMikdash. He acknowledges the fact that he's an Ani. Maybe not an Ani financially, but an Ani mimas. This was his Hineni. So I was thinking maybe there's an added hoisafa along this thing. And that is that why a carbon mincha? Why a carbon mincha? You know, Yisrael Salanter, the Bali Musar, pondered a very interesting question. He said, how are you allowed to give a person kavod? You give a person kavod, why shouldn't we be concerned that if you give him kavod, it's going to get to his head? And what's going to happen is, right, he's going to become a Baal Gaiva. You are lifnei sitim, right? Lifnei iver leisitim michshol. So Rabbi Yisrael wondered out loud that why are you allowed to give a person kavod? Right, it's such a big deal. You give a person kavod, it's a very nice thing. But l'chayra, why are you not worried about a lifnei iver leisitim michshol? It's going to get him. He's going to become a Baal Gaiva. Toyevas Hashem kol gevalev. And why are you not worried that it's going to get to him? Says Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. It's a real chash. It's a very reasonable thing. But when it comes to midas, said Rabbi Yisrael, every person has to worry about his own midas, and let Yenim worry about Yenim's midas. You do what you need to do. You give him kavod. It may lead to his guy. That's his responsibility. He has to make sure that you don't worry about his midas. You worry about your own midas. You do what you need to do. You give kavod. But as it relates to his gaiva, that's his cheshbon. But the truth is, when you give somebody kavod, there really is a concern that it may come lidei gaiva. You know, the Rambam says, when the Rambam talks about the Kohen, and he describes HaKohanim huvdelu michlal halavim. This is in Hilchas Klei HaMikdash Perek Dalet Halacha Aleph. La'avodas hakarbanos. What's the real essence of a Kohen? The essence of a Kohen is what? To give him Trumas and Maestras? No, that's fringe benefits that he gets because of what his essence is. That's not his essence. To duchen, that's the essence of a Kohen, to get the first aliyah. HaKohanim huvdelu michlal halavim. Why? La'avodas hakarbanos. The tachlis of a kohen was avodas hakarbanos. Shenema v'yavdel aharon lahakdisha kodesh hakedashim. That's the tachlis. Says the Rambam, v'tzorich kol adam el Yisrael linug behem kavod harbe. A yid has to give a kohen kavod harbe. Ulahakdem moisam l'chol davar shabektusha. V'tayich b'tayra rishon u'levarich rishon v'litamana yafer rishon. But the point is, says the Rambam, you have to be mechaber a kohen. Not only do you have to be mechaber a kohen, you have to give him kavod harbe. So a person has to honor his father and his mother. You have to be mechaber a talmid chacham. As Hashem lekachatira, the rabbis to be the chacham and vadar to pnei zaken, mipnei seva takum. There's a need to be mechaber a melech. Soim tasam alech a melech. Says the Rambam, you have to be mechaber a kohen. V'tzorich kol adam Yisrael linig behem kavod harbe. Not a little bit of kavod, asach kavod. You have to give a kohen kavod harbe. In fact, there's a big discussion in the Pesach. Could a kohen be meichel al kvodah? Kohen shemachal al kvodah. Kvodah machal or ain't kvodah machal? Remember Rabbeinu Tam with the kohen that bizman shebigdeim aleim k'tushasam aleim. So it touches on that the shitas on Mordechai Masechtas Gittin. But the bottom line is that Rav shemachal al kvodah kvodah machal, Av shemachal al kvodah kvodah machal, Melech shemachal al kvodah ain't kvodah. What about a kohen? But you have to give a kohen kavod harbe. So I was thinking that a kohen is coming to do the avodah now for the first time. This is what he was chosen for. It could come lidei gaiva, right? It's not so rachik to think that it could come lidei gaiva. A little bit of precedence. We know that Nadav and Avihu died. B'yoyim hakamas hamishkan. Ba'akriva me'esh zara, k'tayr zara. We mentioned it earlier in the daf. And the truth is, if you look in the Gemara Masechtas Eruvin and in the Midrashim, there's so many different reasons for Misas Nadav and Avihu. And at first glance, it's really tzarech in gadol. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in Emes Yaakov, you can look it up in Parsha Shmini, says that he believes that really all the reasons that Chazal gave really stem from one shirish. And Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, again, we're talking about Nadav and Avihu, B'Kroivay HaKadosh. They were the proteges of Moshe and Aharon. So obviously we have to say what we're about to say, take it all with a grain of salt. But the point is, says Rabbi Yaakov, he believes if you go through all the Chazals, that Tzad HaShavah Shabbat was Gaiva. There was a little bit of Gaiva. And the truth is, Chazal say that they were Moira Halacha B'fnei Rabbi. Moira Halacha B'fnei Rabbi comes from a little bit of Gaiva. Ordinarily, a Talmud would feel too humble around his Rebbe to be Moira Halacha. But it comes from a little bit of Gaiva. So the Chassam Sofer in his Svarim also says that the Iker Chet of Nadav Avihu was Moira Halacha B'fnei Rabbi, which is very much rooted in Gaiva. And says Rabbi Yaakov that there was a little bit of Gaiva, again, Kaviyachol on the Madrega of Nadav and Avihu, and that's where everything came from. It's very reasonable. This is the first day. You're doing the Avodah. Everybody's looking at you. You were nivdal for this. The Tzarech Kaladim Yisrael Linig Bem Kavod Harbe. Rabbi Yisrael said every time you give a person kavod, there's a chash that it may come lidei gaiva. Now you have kohanim, you're giving them kavod harbe. So what's the first thing that the kohen needed to do? The first thing the kohen needs to do is he needs to bring the mincha. A mincha is a minchas ani to remind him. Don't be such a balgaifa. Hineni ha'ani mimas. It's true, you were chosen, but at the end of the day, recognize that you're serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you have this task of being a shliach for such a tzibur. You have to remember not to allow this position of prominence that you have to get to you. Thus, excuse the pun, a little bit of humble pie and a little bit of a minchas ani to make sure that it doesn't come lidei gaiva.